Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's Anthony, your professional yapper, and today we're going to be talking about gaming console generations. So obviously everybody knows what gaming consoles are. They've been around since the 1970s. And today I'm going to go consoles are normally broken up in generations, and there's currently 9 generations in total. And today I'm going to go over each generation and talk about the history of each console in each generation. I decided to not include any handhelds because I want to make that its own separate video, but with one exception when we get to the 9th generation. Obviously I couldn't include every single console that was ever made, obviously, but I tried to at least get the popular ones and the ones that I've seen the most. So for context, I used to work at a game store, and we would sell newer game consoles, newer games, and older stuff. It was a mix of both. So I learned a lot about older consoles and older console generations. And that's actually a good thing for this video because when we get to a certain generation, I'm gonna be hella biased, and I'm gonna explain that later. And we have the first generation, which was released from 1972 to 1983, and it is generally the first. It was generally limited to dedicated consoles, and a lot of these only had 1 or 2 pre-built onto the console. In the case of the Odyssey, it did have game cards, but they didn't have any program games on them. The Atari Pong was also released at this time, and it was released in 1975, and along with the Telstar, which was developed by Coleco in 1976. And those consoles conclude the first generation. Okay, I'm sorry, I promise the next couple generations will not be this short. Now we're gonna move on to the second generation. The second generation was introduced in 1976, and it went from 76 to 1982. And it was the first generation that introduced game cartridges. I'm sorry, I have a lisp, y'all. And it meant the game's code is stored into a ROM within the cartridge. And the ROM cartridge was first implemented in the Fairchild Video Entertainment System in 1976. But a lot of the second generation consoles, such as the Atari 26,000 and the Magnavox Odyssey 2, used the same ROM. The 70s and the 80s and part of the 90s were known as the golden age of arcade video games. And during this second generation, a lot of arcade games such as Space Invaders and Asteroids got home console ports through these second generation consoles. Atari has been acquired by Warner Communications, and this is when Activision, a little corporation that we all know as the people who made the Call of Duty series, and in 1978, Activision became the first third-party game developer, and they made games for multiple consoles and did not have a console of their own. And now we move on to the third generation, which went from 1983 to 2003, and this is where a little company called Nintendo starts to gain their prominence, which will be shown in the rest of the console generations as Nintendo becomes one of the most dominant companies when it comes to gaming. And this generation is also frequently known as the 8-bit generation, and this also saw the console market shift from the United States and to Japan, which as we know today is responsible for a lot of game companies and game developer teams. The Sega SG-1000 and the Nintendo NES launched simultaneously in Japan in 1983, and the Famicom launched a year later in 1984 after some technical recalls. And Nintendo wanted to bring the console to North America, but there was a video game crash that happened a couple years prior, and a lot of people thought gaming was just going to be a fad of the 80s. But with Nintendo and the NES, they rebranded it, and they wanted to make it look less like a gaming console and more like a home video system, and which caused the NES to sell really well. In 1986, Sega tried to compete with the NES by releasing the Master System. It did not gain traction. Atari tried to compete with the Atari 78,000 in 1987, but also failed to knock the NES off its dominance position. The NES remained in production until 2003, and it was discontinued. And now we move on to the fourth generation, which was technically released in tandem with the third generation from 1987 to 2004, which technically ran at the same time as Generation 3. The fourth generation, also known as the 16-bit generation, further advanced core console technology with 16-bit processors, improving graphics and audio capabilities of games. And the two heavy hitters of this console generation were the Sega Genesis, which was released in 1988, and the Super Nintendo, aka the SNES, which was the successor to the original NES, and that released in 1990. The Sega Genesis is probably like one of the best. Well, I don't want to say the best because I wasn't born in that time, but it's one of the most successful Sega consoles. And the Sega Genesis also saw the introduction of a little blue hedgehog that we all know and love today. And Sonic was Sega's attempt at competing with Nintendo and having a mascot for their console. But obviously now, in terms of modern consoles, Sonic and Mario are both on Nintendo. Well, Sonic is now multi-console still. And CD-ROMs have dropped sufficiently to make them desirable for use for shipping computer software, including for video games for personal computers. CD-ROMs offered more storage space than game cartridges could allow for full motion and other detailed audio-video works to be used in games. Similar to the third generation, the fourth generation had a long life that interwoven with the fifth generation, and the SNES was also continued in 2003. Okay, now we're going to move on to the fifth generation, which was released from 1993 to 2006. And during this time, home computers gained greater prominence as a way of playing video games, and the video game industry continues to thrive alongside home computers due to the advantages of lower prices, easier portability, circuitry specifically developed towards video games, and the ability to be played on a television set, which PCs cannot do. This is also where Sony entered the console space with the PlayStation 1, and this console generation was also the generation to shift to 32-bit processors, and besides Nintendo, every single console of this generation does not use game cartridges. This was due to gaming companies wanting to capitalize on the power of CD-ROMs. Despite that, the SNES from last generation was still one of the highest selling consoles of this time period, but two of its super direct competitors were released during this time: the Sega Saturn in 1995 and the PlayStation 1, which was also released in 1995. While the Saturn sold well, it did have some technical flaws, but established Sega as a number of key game series going forward. The PlayStation, using optical media, introduced the use of memory cards to save your games. PlayStation's approach allowed games to have longer gameplay and narrative elements, leading to highly successful role-playing games like Final Fantasy VII, and in 1986, the PlayStation became the best-selling console over the GBA. Nintendo released their next console, the Nintendo 64, in late 1996. It still used game cartridges because Nintendo believed that using game cartridges prevented piracy, but it did have the use of memory cards. Nintendo developed a strong library of first-party titles, including Wave Racer 64, and one of the best games, in my opinion, in the entire Nintendo library, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The N64 did not match the PS1 sales, but it did keep Nintendo as a key competitor in the market alongside Sony and Sega. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 6th generation, which is widely regarded as one of the most popular console generations, and I feel like this generation kick-started like what we know gaming as now, especially because now we have the 3 heavy hitters, which are still heavy hitters today: Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. The PS2 was launched in 2000, and it had backwards compatibility, and it had DVD support as addition to CD-ROM. And for the PS2, it's a very special console for me because it launched a lot of popular Sony franchises such as Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, God of War, and one of my personal favorites, Kingdom Hearts. The PS2 received support until 2013, and as of 2020, it remains the best-selling home console of all time, which I think it still does in 2024. And notice how I haven't talked about Sega that much in this portion of the video. It's because Sega could not compete with Sony and discontinued the Sega Dreamcast in 2001. And after the Dreamcast was discontinued, Sega left the home console market forever and became a third-party developer company, which explains how Sonic is now able to be on PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo today. And Nintendo's entry in this console generation is the GameCube, which used tiny DVD disc, and they were optical. A special Game Boy player was attached to the GameCube to play Game Boy cartridges on. And this is where Microsoft entered the market with the first Xbox, the original Xbox that released in 2001, and Microsoft considered the PS2's success to be a threat to the personal computer in living room space, and had developed the Xbox to compete. The Xbox was designed based more on Microsoft's experience from personal computers using an operating system built out from its Microsoft Windows and DirectX features, utilizing a hard disk for a save game store, built-in Ethernet functionality, and created the first console online service, Xbox Live, to support multiplayer games. While the original Xbox had modest sales compared to the PS2, it was not profitable for the company. Microsoft considered the Xbox to have successfully demonstrated their abilities to participate in the console market. So remember earlier in the video when I said there was a console generation that I was very biased against? It's this generation. It's the 7th generation, and it lasted from 2005 to 2017. And this is the generation I have the most fond memories of, because these are the consoles that I grew up with primarily from elementary to middle school. And these are the 3 big heavy hitters that are still heavy hitters today: the Xbox 360, the PS3, and the Wii. While the last generation was known as the 3D era, this generation is known as the HD era. And by this generation, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo had all developed consoles designed with interface for the internet, adding networking support for either wired or wireless connections, online services to support multiplayer games, and digital storefronts for digital purchase of games, and both internal storage and support for external storage on the consoles of these games. And the Xbox 360 was released in 2005, which is the year I was born, and it was able to play DVD disc, and Microsoft opted to support the HD DVD format with the add-on playback for HD DVD films. The format ended up being deprecated compared to the Blu-ray. Xbox 360 was backwards compatible with half of the original Xbox library, and throughout its lifetime, the Xbox 360 was troubled by a consistent hardware fault known as the Red Ring of Death, which actually happened to my old Xbox 360. It was so sad, and Microsoft actually spent over $1 billion to correct the problem. The PS3 was released in 2006, and the PlayStation 3 represented a shift of the internal hardware from Sony's custom Emotion engine to a PowerPC-based system. The PS3 unit shipped with a special Emotion engine daughter board that allowed for backwards compatibility of PS2 games, but later revisions of the unit removed this, leaving only software-based emulation for PlayStation games available. Sony banked on the Blu-ray format, which was included from the start, and partially helped spur the adoption of Blu-ray as the favored format for high-definition optical media. With the PS3, Sony introduced the PlayStation Network for its online services and storefront. While the system would initially have a slow start in the market due to its high price, complex game development and environment, and initial lack of quality games, the PS3 eventually gained more well received over time following gradual price cuts, improved marketing campaigns, new hardware revisions, particularly the slim models, and critically acclaimed exclusives such as The Last of Us and God of War. Nintendo introduced the Wii in 2006, around the same time as the PS3. Nintendo lacked the same manufacturing capabilities and relationships with major hardware suppliers such as Sony and Microsoft, and to compete, diverged on a feature-for-feature approach and instead developed the Wii around the novel use of motion controls in the Wii Remote. This blue ocean strategy, releasing a product where there was no competition, was considered part of the unit's success, and which drove Microsoft and Sony to develop their own motion control accessors to compete. The Wii was also compatible with GameCube Disc, and with the Wii, the Nintendo wanted to focus more on family-friendly and kid-friendly games, such as Wii Sports, Wii Fitness, more Mario titles, and I think that worked out for them. Nintendo focused on fun with this generation, and I look back on the Wii. I never owned a Wii, but I would go to my cousin's house and we would play Just Dance and Wii Sports and Mario Tennis, and I think the Wii accomplished what Nintendo wanted it to accomplish. Sadly, we're not talking about handhelds. If we were, then I would be here for an hour because I have so much fond memories with the DS, 3DS, and PSP. That will all be explained in another video, and yeah. We're on the 8th generation, which went from 2012 to 2020, but certain 8th generation consoles are still active today and are still getting support. Aside from the usual hardware enhancements, consoles from the 8th generation focus on further integration with other media and increased connectivity. Consoles at this point had also standardized on CPUs using the x86 instruction set, the same as in personal computers, and there was a convergence of the individual hardware components between consoles and personal computers, making the porting of games between these systems much easier. Later hardware improvements pushed for higher frame rates up to 4K resolutions. Digital distribution increased in popularity, while the addition and improvements to remote play capabilities became standard, and second screen experiences via companion apps added more interactivity to games. The Wii U was introduced in 2012 and was considered by Nintendo to be a successor to the Wii, but geared to more serious players. The Wii U was Nintendo's worst-selling home console, selling around 13.56 million units before being discontinued, but some of Nintendo's first-party games for the system have sold around half of the install base of the system, telling that Nintendo has a very dedicated fanbase. That part is actually really true, and I'm sorry Nintendo fans, but y'all will buy anything with the fucking Nintendo logo on it. Both the PS4 and Xbox One came out in 2013. Both were similar improvements over the previous generation's respective consoles, providing more computational power to support up to 60 frames per second at 180p resolutions for some games. At 1080p, Each unit saw a similar set of revisions and repackaging to develop high and low-end cost versions. In the case of the Xbox One, the console's initial launch had included the Kinect device, but this became highly controversial in terms of potential privacy violations and lack of developer support, and by its mid-generation refresh, the Kinect had been dropped and discontinued as a game device. Both consoles eventually released upgraded hardware during their mid-cycle refresh, with Sony releasing the PS4 Pro and Microsoft releasing the Xbox One X, which allowed for higher frame rates and up to 4K resolution, in addition to slim models marking a departure from previous generations while adding considerable longevity to this generation cycle. This also marks the beginning of VR systems appearing, with the three main systems: the PlayStation VR, which worked with PS4 hardware, the Oculus Rift, and the HTC Vive. And now we're finally talking about the 9th generation, aka the current generation, which released in 2020 and still going to the present day. And the first release was the Nintendo Switch in 2017. The Switch is considered the first hybrid game console. It uses a special CPU/GPU combination that can run at different clock frequencies depending on how it is used. It can be placed into a special docking unit that is hooked to a television and a permanent power supply, allowing faster clock frequencies to be used to be played at higher resolutions and frame rates, and thus more comparable to a home console. Alternatively, it can be removed and used either with an attached Joy-Con unit as a Joy-Con controllers as a handheld unit, or can even be played as a tablet-like system via touchscreen. In these modes, the CPU/GPU run at lower clock speeds to conserve battery power, and the graphics are not as robust as in the dock version. The larger suite of online services was removed due to the Nintendo Switch Online subscription, including several free NES and SNES titles, replacing the past Virtual Console system. The Switch was designed to address many of the hardware and marketing faults around the Wii U's launch, and has become one of the company's fastest selling consoles after the Wii. Both Microsoft and Sony released successors to their home consoles in November 2020. Consoles in this generation also launched with lower cost models lacking optical disc drives, targeting those who would prefer to purchase games exclusively through digital downloads. Both consoles families target 4K and 8K resolution, televisions at high frame rates, support for real-time ray tracing rendering, 3D spatial audio, variable refresh rates, the use of high performance solid state drives (SSD) as an internal high-speed memory to make delivering game content much faster than reading from optical disc or standard hard drives, which can eliminate loading times and support in-game streaming. With features that were commonly standard in PCs and the move to higher performances, APUs consoles in the 9th generation now have capabilities comparable to high-end personal computers, often making cross-platform development easier and more widely available than previously, further converging and blurring the line between video game consoles and personal computers. The PS5 and Xbox Series were both compatible to the last gen, the PS4 and Xbox One games, which kind of makes upgrading pointless. Also, the fact that last gen still continues to be supported. In the case of PS5 and Xbox, the Wii U has been discontinued. But yeah, and that has strengthened the belief that the PS5 and the Xbox Series X have no games, because everything that is released also releases on last gen. Alright, and we are at the end of our video. This was all of the home console generations. This was so fun to make, and I promise I will make a handheld series soon. And I will talk about all the handheld consoles in another video. I was gonna do it all in one video, but it was kind of too much, and then I was having trouble researching consoles. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna just do all the handhelds in a separate video, because I grew up more with handhelds than home consoles, because I had a sibling who had epilepsy, and so we weren't really allowed to have an Xbox 360, PS3. So a lot of my memories with those consoles are playing them at friends' houses or cousins' houses. But the consoles myself was allowed to have was a DS and a PSP. As for other videos I'm probably not gonna do the Elden Ring videos like I said I was gonna do. I'm probably gonna, because I have really gone to I really started enjoying the game on its own, and I really don't feel like filming it because I'm already 3 hours into the game. So I think I'm gonna play it all, finish it, and then do a review. And yeah, and similar I did with Hogwarts Legacy, but I deleted that video because reasons. And yeah, as for the Kingdom Hearts stuff, I'm gonna spend basically all of December trying to finish Kingdom Hearts 2, and then January is gonna be I'm gonna watch all the cutscenes for Recoded, all the cutscenes for 0.2, and I was going to play the game, but I do not have the 2.8 collection, so I'm gonna have to watch all of the cutscenes for Dream Drop Distance as well. And the next game that we will play after Kingdom Hearts 2 will obviously be Kingdom Hearts 3, which my goal is to start in February and to be done with the series in February to March. I do apologize for my voice, and if you can't really understand what I'm saying because I'm talking so much and I'm talking so fast. I have a lisp, and it's kind of hard to talk with this lisp, but I'm working on it, and I'm really trying hard because I love making videos, and my lisp makes me sound weird sometimes, but I can get over it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to follow, and subscribe, and to follow all of my socials. This is Anthony, your professional yapper, signing out. You walk away, you don't hear me say